Story 1. Valley of Screams. Late one summer evening, Mark drove his rusted sedan up the cracked driveway of the old Adventure Valley amusement park. Twilight's last rays lit up the first row of empty parking stalls. Mark's friend Alina sat in the passenger seat, eyes gleaming with nostalgia as they rounded a bend and the park's creaking gates came into view. Closed for decades, the park's sign swung on its hinges. Adventure Valley Amusement Park. A swing set's lone chain rattled softly in the cool evening breeze. Inside, the park was a tomb of bygone fun. Weeds sprouted between cracked concrete, and faded posters flapped on shuttered kiosks. The air smelled of rain and rust, and Farov, a loon of a circus organ, drifted eerily on the wind. Alina squeezed Mark's hand. "It feels just like it did when we were kids," she whispered. In the center of the park loomed Mayhem Mountain, a giant wooden roller coaster, its once silver rails dulled and creeping with ivy. To the west, the Steel Viper's rusted loop caught the last light of sunset. Both of them had promised, after high school, they'd someday own this park and ride these coasters forever. Tonight, they had the keys. They walked to the ticket booth, the tinny announcer's voice still on loop inside. Mark opened the gate, and it squealed, startling them. Darkness descended fast once the sun dipped. Power was intermittent, so the neon lights along the midway flickered on and off like ghosts, blinking. Alina laughed nervously. "Remember how we used to scream our heads off on the Excalibur?" she said, gesturing toward an old wooden coaster. Mark nodded, running his hand along its sun-bleached railing. "We ride every coaster tonight," he vowed, with flashlights in hand. They climbed into a battered roller coaster car that once held 10 screaming riders at once. On 3, Mark counted. 1, 2, 3. They let go, and the car lurched forward by gravity alone. It creaked up the first steep hill. As they reached the crest, the world fell silent and stopped. For a breathtaking moment, city lights glimmered on the horizon behind them. Then with a jerk they plunged down into darkness. The wooden tracks groaned beneath them. In that blackness, Alina squeezed Mark's arm tight. Suddenly, hundreds of LEDs along the tracks flickered on all at once above them, forming a tunnel of red light. The brightness was blinding. Out of nowhere, the coaster car jerked off the track with a thunderous, grinding crash. Mark and Alina were flung sideways against each other. Air whooshed past their ears as the car twisted violently down a side chute of unfinished wood. Alina screamed, but the sound died in Mark's mouth. Her eyes had gone completely blank, glowing faintly green. In the eerie silence that followed, Mark found himself alone on the ride. Alina's empty jacket was all that remained beside him. The coaster's wheels squealed as they climbed another incline, and Mark realized with horror this was no normal ride. The car came to a sudden halt atop another hill. The shoulder harnesses dropped on their own, and the brakes screeched. Mark held his breath. 2 giant letters flickered into life on the wall ahead. "Welcome." The car jerked into motion again, this time careening toward a tunnel of mirrors. Mark's flashlight beam swung wildly. In the reflection, he finally saw what had happened. Reflected in dozens of shards was Alina's face, or something wearing her face. It grinned with hollow eyes. Mark dropped the flashlight. He heard laughter, then hundreds of distant, echoing laughs, and screams just a little too close. The coaster plunged into darkness, and the car shot forward of its own accord. Outside, the night sky gave way to fog, and the stars disappeared. The tunnel seemed endless. Mark couldn't see the track anymore, but he could feel it shaking and groaning like a living thing. An icy whisper drifted through the car. "Welcome back." When the ride finally ground to a halt at dawn's first light, Mark crawled out of the coaster car alone. The park was silent. A pale morning mist hugged the ground. Alina's jacket lay crumpled on the ground, but of her, there was no sign. He called her name, voice cracking, but only the empty rails replied. Mark left Adventure Valley that morning with a friend missing and a new fear. Some childhood promises can never be fulfilled. Story 2. The Doll in the Chest. When Emily was 6 years old, the battered toy chest in her bedroom contained only 3 treasures: a painting kit, a little red wagon, and a blue and white doll she called Betsy. Emily's mother had given her Betsy on a hard day when she cried all afternoon. The doll's chipped porcelain face was forever smiling, and Emily imagined Betsy could whisper back whenever Emily talked. Most nights, Emily would clutch Betsy tightly beneath her pillow and pretend Betsy told her bedtime stories. Lately, however, Betsy's stories had changed. One spring evening, Emily hung beside her favorite swing set outside, while her mother argued on the phone about money. Emily's stomach twisted. A group of girls she barely knew skipped by, laughing at her alone in the yard. Emily pouted and brought Betsy over to the porch. The doll's glassy eyes seemed to follow Emily's every move. "They think I'm stupid," Emily muttered. Suddenly, she felt a prickly thrill run up her back. Betsy's doll lips seemed to curl. Emily glanced around. No one was near. "Go on, Emily," a soft voice giggled in her ear. Emily's heart thumped. She turned. Betsy was in her arms. "Throw stones at the girls," the voice whispered. "Show them." Emily froze. Throw stones. It wasn't a normal thought. She looked at Betsy's porcelain face. The doll's eyes glinted green in the fading daylight. "Mom will be mad if I break anything," Emily protested aloud. Betsy let out a tiny, tinkling laugh. "They all laugh at you. You hit them once, they'll stop." That night, Emily dreamed of lifting rocks in the dark and tossing them at empty swings. In the morning she woke with muddy knees and a new fire in her chest. At kindergarten, when the mean girls teased her about her new dress, Emily pretended Betsy was alive and wanted company. Before anyone noticed, Emily snatched a fist-sized pebble from the playground's ivy. With Betsy held tight by one arm, she hurled the stone at the girls. It missed their legs and pinged harmlessly off a lamppost. But the girls squealed and backed away, eyes wide. Emily's face burned with shame. But Betsy giggled and rubbed Emily's arm through the air. At home, Emily crept into the kitchen and told her mother the doll made her do it. Her mother laughed, thinking Emily meant she had imagined it. "Good job, Em," she said, smoothing Emily's hair, "if it makes you happy." Betsy sat on the counter, smiling as Emily's mother hurried away to call the landlord. Emily watched Betsy's eyes for a long moment. Suddenly, Betsy's lips seemed to twist into a grin. "I didn't do it," Emily said softly. "Betsy was just a doll, wasn't she?" The doll's voice returned at night, unbidden. One stormy midnight, Emily slept fitfully until a distant thunder snapped her awake. She sat upright and felt a cold laugh run through the room. By the pale moonlight, she saw Betsy sitting on her dresser. The doll's amber eyes shone in the dark. "I was lonely," it whispered. "Thank you for letting me play." Emily shivered. She closed her eyes. When lightning flashed, she opened them to see Betsy on the floor beside her bed, face down. Emily's chest rose as she tried to calm down. "I threw it against the wall. That glass bottle." Her mother's car keys were on the table that evening, just beyond reach. Emily had nearly thrown the bottle in the kitchen at her mother's head during an argument. But Betsy had jumped from Emily's hands, taking the fall. No one knew Emily planned harm. Was it really just fortune, or something else? After that night, Emily locked Betsy in the toy chest under her bed. Still, every night, she could almost hear Betsy's voice, faint as a lullaby, saying, "We have more games to play." Whether doll or demon, Emily knew some toys should never be trusted, and the toy chest remained firmly locked. Story 3. Whisper Mountain. 11-year-old Daniel stared out the school bus window as it rounded the bend into Driskin County, Missouri. His father's new job had brought the family to this sleepy Ozarks town in summer. He pressed his forehead against the glass. To Daniel, the dense pine forests on either side seemed to lean in, like watching giants. That first day, The bus driver joked about Whisper Mountain looming over town. Every kid hush lived that night, certain something haunted its shadows. Summer turned to fall. Whisper Mountain became Daniel's backyard. The other children dared each other to stay inside after sunset. Daniel couldn't resist. One October evening, after a field trip to an old mine, he walked home alone through wooded paths. Golden light filtered through red-tinged leaves. Daniel imagined the pine trees whispering secrets as he passed. Suddenly the sound of children's laughter echoed behind him. He whirled around, but saw only empty woods. At home, Daniel confided in his older sister, Melissa. She rolled her eyes. "It's just the wind, or maybe hunters," she scoffed. But Daniel sensed she was uneasy too. That night, in his new cabin home, Daniel awoke to a soft rustle of leaves outside his window. He opened his eyes and saw a mist creeping down the hillside, coiling around the oak tree in front of the house. As he watched, frozen, the mist resolved into faint shapes, dancing figures with hollow eyes. Daniel blinked hard. They vanished when the wind shifted. Over the next weeks, small eerie things began to happen. First, the camp counselor at Daniel's school refused to enter Whisper Mountain's forest. One rainy afternoon, Daniel went hiking past the chain-link fence at the park's edge. He found a single muddy footprint, much larger than his boot, then muddy handprints on the stone wall by the creek. That night, a shrill howl split the dark. Melissa yanked the covers over Daniel's ears, but couldn't stifle a gasp. She had heard it too, a human cry mixed with an animal's. A scream that was somehow both far and right, outside their window. On Halloween, Daniel's father took him to a corn maze at the local fair. As Daniel ran among turnips, a gray-haired teller warned him, "Keep away from the mountain's heart after dark." Daniel was scared, but when curiosity overcame him, he slipped away, toward Whisper Mountain, under the silver moon. He found the old stone steps leading up the peak, half crumbled and entangled in vines. Step by careful step, he climbed, heart hammering. Near the top, he stopped, trembling. In a clearing under the full moon, he saw a circle of weathered stones. Inside them lay the decaying shell of a huge black bear, and strange purple daisies growing from the ground. Suddenly, a guttural voice behind him said, "Welcome home, Daniel." He whirled around. There, leaning on the rocks, was a little girl with ragged dress and eyes that glowed pale blue. "Why don't you join us?" She giggled, yet her voice was hollow. Beyond her, in the tree line, dozens of pairs of cat-like eyes blinked like fireflies. Daniel's legs turned to ice. The girl extended a bony hand. Daniel turned to run. Her laughter chased him down the steps like a pack of wolves. He scrambled home and burst through the door, breathless. His parents insisted it was a nightmare, but Daniel knew the waking howl he heard that night belonged to the girl on the mountain, crying out in triumph. He slept with a knife under his pillow after that years later. Daniel only whispered the truth. At the top of Whisper Mountain lies an ancient curse, and sometimes on silent autumn nights, a little ghost girl dances among the stones, calling the lonely and the lost. After all, on Whisper Mountain, bad things happen to those who wander too far. Story 4. The Forgotten Sanctum. Emily pulled the hood of her jacket tight and squeezed through a broken window of Cedar Grove Asylum. Down below in the parking lot, her friends Aaron and Juliet crouched by her backpack, creeping over the mossy halls with only flashlights. They had seen all the local legends, padded cells, midnight screams, and though the place was locked by law enforcement years ago, kids still dared each other to explore. Tonight, Emily wanted something more than dares. The asylum's corridors yawned with darkness. Doors hung on rusted hinges. In the flicker of her flashlight, she glimpsed peeling wallpaper and a bulletin board of outdated staff photos. On the cracked tile floor, they followed an arrow drawn in chalk. Follow the mist. Emily's flashlight drifted up a stairwell, where gray mist seemed to seep from the basement doors. The girls exchanged a glance. "I don't know about this," Juliet whispered. Aaron shrugged, adrenaline pumping. Come on. We've been waiting for years for something real." They descended the ancient stairs, breath visible in the frigid air. At the bottom, the smell of incense grew strong. Light flickered ahead. Pushing a heavy door open, they gasped. In a concrete room lit by a deep red glow, stood a circle of candles. Burnt incense filled the air, twining among their hair. In the center of the circle on the floor lay a crudely drawn pentagram. Emily's heart pounded as she noticed tiny scraps of paper on the floor, torn from their own class schedules and medical charts. Aaron slowly traced his flashlight to a skeleton of a bull's skull perched on top of the pentagram. "Who would—" Juliet began, voice trembling. Before she could finish, a sudden click of the door behind them echoed ominously. The trio spun around. Two men stood there, faces pale, but eyes burning. One wore a threadbare lab coat. The other held what looked like a butcher's knife. Emily gaped as the figure in the lab coat smiled. "Welcome, visitors," he said quietly. His voice was eerily calm. Aaron tried to step back, but the priest's hand gripped Aaron's collar. Juliet stifled a scream. Candles flared brighter. Emily's flashlight fell on the wall behind the men. Scrawled in dried blood was Pentagram Project. Realizing the cult had been here, performing unspeakable rites, Emily lunged. She grabbed a fallen candlestick and swung at the knife-wielding man. He snarled and knocked the stick aside. Aaron pushed past the doctor and bolted for the door, Juliet stumbling after him. Emily followed, adrenaline and terror surging through her veins. The men screamed in anger. The smell of incense was overshadowed by bloodlust. Racing up the stairs, the asylum's layout became a blur. The trio dared not look back at footsteps racing behind them. Finally, they burst through the same window Emily had squeezed into, and didn't stop until they reached Aaron's rusty Chevy in the lot. Panting and shaking, they watched the asylum's darkness through Emily caught one last glimpse at the window they escaped through. A pale face peered out. A cold voice whispered from the hospital into the night, "We will find you." The next morning the front-page headline announced a break-in at Cedar Grove, but Emily and her friends stayed silent. No one else would believe them about the cultist. Yet each night after, Emily flinched at every creak in the house and dreamed of candles. Some doors in the hospital are forbidden, she thought, and sometimes what awaits on the other side is far more horrific than anything in your imagination. Story 5. Midnight Visitors. Samantha was almost asleep when she heard it. A soft, deliberate knock at her front door just after midnight. Her Labrador, Max, growled low at her feet. With a groan, Sam rose from bed and padded to the entryway. Inside, the house was dark and silent, except for a small lamp on the hall table. Peeking through the peephole, Sam saw a little girl and boy, maybe 12 and 6, standing on her porch. The storm raged outside, rain dripping off the roof. "Who are you?" Sam whispered. The older girl smiled politely. "We're sorry to bother you," she said, voice oddly mature for her age. She held out her pale face through the rain. Sam noticed one horrifying thing. Her eyes were perfectly black. No color. The smaller boy beside her looked up, also with the same black eyes. The siblings were soaked, but the coat the girl wore was threadbare and warm instead of wet. "Please," the girl said softly, "our car broke down. We just need to use a phone." Her gaze was direct, strangely calm. Sam's throat tightened. Something about them felt terribly wrong. Max's hackles rose. The dog sniffed the air and turned away from the door. Sam stepped back. "I don't think I have any phone," she lied. The girl's smile didn't waver. "It's okay. We can wait here until morning." Sam's heart pounded. These were children, lost in the storm, but Sam could feel a cold dread flooding her. She remembered the old news story. Black-eyed kids at a suburban door. You'd better come in, Sam found herself saying. Against her instincts, she unlocked the door. The children stepped in silently, water pooling at their feet. The girl glanced curiously at Sam's living room, family photos, and a gas fireplace. She pulled off her coat, revealing an odd turtleneck sweater that gleamed unnaturally. "Max, get back," Sam snapped, as her dog snarled at the children. Max whimpered and backed off uneasy. The boy tightly clutched a frayed stuffed rabbit. "Just call the towing company," Sam urged, hands trembling as she fumbled for the cordless phone. The girl's black eyes followed her. "No phone," the boy said, voice too mature and calm for a child. Instead, he extended the rabbit's hand like pawed to Sam, revealing something covered in dark stains. Suddenly, Sam realized with horror what she was holding. The stuffed rabbit had an old carrot tag on its foot. It had gone missing from her niece's bedroom years ago. The pattern on its fur was exactly her niece's favorite toy. "Where did you get this?" Sam whispered. In that instant, the children's faces twisted. The girl's polite smile disappeared, replaced by something hungry and vile. "Our mom," the girl crooned, eyes unblinking, "is lost. We're so cold." Sam's instincts screamed to run. She backed toward the kitchen, then pivoted and slammed the front door as quickly as she dared. The latch made a loud click. Inside, Sam raced to the living room window. Heart in her throat, she peeked out. The children were still there, staring at the door. Then, one by one, they lifted their faces to the sky and smiled at Sam. Then they were gone, vanished. As if never there, Max whimpered beside her. Sam checked the lock, but the door had never been unlocked. The night was silent again, broken only by Sam's own racing pulse. Sam never found out where those children really came from, or how her niece's toy appeared out of thin air. All she knew was that some legends are true. By morning light, she told herself, they were just lost kids. But every late-night creak of wind outside her house, Sam's heart stopped. Children with black eyes sometimes come knocking, and sometimes they insist on coming in. Story 6. The Lantern Man Josh had been living at his aunt's farmhouse for less than a month when he first noticed the strange lantern glow drifting through the woods at night. Brookside was supposed to be peaceful, quiet, rural town, where people kept to themselves and where the loudest sound after sunset was crickets buzzing in the tall grass. Josh had moved there to escape everything that happened last winter, hoping the silence would help him start over. But instead of peace, he found the one thing worse than noise, a persistent, flickering light that seemed to watch him from the tree line every night. The first time he mentioned it, his aunt froze, her fork hovering halfway to her lips. "You didn't look at it, did you?" she asked, voice trembling. Josh frowned, confused. "I mean, it was just a lantern, probably some neighbor." "There are no neighbors past those woods," she said sharply. "And if you see it again, keep the curtains closed." Her fear seemed exaggerated, but that didn't stop the unease creeping up Josh's spine. Nights were colder in Brookside, far colder than they should have been for early September. Even inside the house, the air felt heavy and damp after sundown. Josh started noticing other things too. Muddy footprints by the porch, faint tapping on the back door just after midnight, and the unsettling feeling that he was being watched whenever he walked past the back windows. His aunt blamed the wind and stray dogs, but her excuses sounded like lies she'd rehearsed many times before. One night, the tapping grew louder, persistent, rhythmic. Josh's heart pounded as he approached the window, pulling the curtain back no more than an inch. The lantern glow stood at the edge of the woods, brighter than usual. It pulsed faintly, almost like it was breathing. The tapping stopped the moment he looked at it, as if whoever held the lantern sensed him watching. Sleep evaded him for hours. But sometime after 2 in the morning, he heard something new, a soft voice, drifting from outside his window. "Come help, please." The voice was thin and watery, like someone drowning mid-sentence. Against every instinct, Josh grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The cold hit him immediately, so sharp he could see his breath. The lantern began drifting deeper into the woods, moving in slow, deliberate arcs, as if guiding him somewhere he followed. Leaves crunching underfoot. The deeper he went, the less natural the forest seemed. The trees leaned inward, their branches twisting like hands reaching for him. The air thickened into something damp and foul-smelling. Eventually, the lantern stopped beside an old, collapsed stone well in a clearing. Moss and vines crawled over its edges, and the rocks looked clawed, gouged by something desperate to escape. Josh stepped closer and shined his flashlight down into the darkness. A cold gust rose from within, carrying whispers, hundreds of weak, pleading voices layered atop each other. Then pale fingers curled over the rim of the well, followed by more, like a cluster of hands belonging to something trapped below. Josh stumbled backward, terror closing his throat. The lantern began flickering wildly, and suddenly he understood. It wasn't being held. It was floating like bait. The fingers tightened their grip, pulling upward, and a wet gasp echoed from deep within the well, as though something had finally found an audience after decades in the dark. Josh ran. He didn't remember the sprint back to the farmhouse, only the feeling of something cold brushing the back of his neck. When he burst through the door, his aunt was awake in the dark kitchen, eyes wet with fear. "You followed it," she whispered. "It wanted you to see where it died." She locked every door and window before dawn, but as the first light crept across the horizon, Josh heard a new sound, soft tapping on the back door, more insistent now. Someone or something was still trying to come inside, and now it knew Josh had seen it. Story 7. Under the lake, most people in Grayson refused to walk near the lake after sunset. They said the water behaved differently after dark. It didn't ripple, didn't breathe, didn't even reflect starlight the way it should. Visitors assumed it was superstition, but locals avoided it the way people avoid cliffs, quietly and without question. Alex, however, wasn't from Grayson. He'd only been in town a month, hired to help repair the decaying wooden pier stretching out over the lake's murky surface. Overtime was good money, so he often stayed late long after his coworkers headed home. On one Friday evening, after finishing repairs, Alex chose the lakeside trail as a shortcut home. The moon was unusually bright, painting the water in perfect silver. Too perfect. The reflection was so still that Alex instinctively stopped walking. The air around him felt heavy, coated in a sharp metallic scent that made his eyes sting. He took another step, and that's when he saw it. Ripples spreading slowly from the center of the lake, as though something massive was rising. The first thing to break the surface was a handpail, swollen and dripping with sludge. Alex's pulse spiked. He froze, unable to move, as a shape emerged behind the hand. A figure covered in reeds and torn lake weeds, rising and jerking unnatural motions. Its face was the worst part. No eyes, no nose, just shallow dents where features should have been, and a mouth hanging open in a slack, waterlogged gape. It inhaled an awful, rattling sound that seemed to pull the cold toward Alex. It didn't walk toward him. It simply pointed at him with one shaking finger. And then the lake itself whispered, a deep, resonant voice that seemed to echo from the water, the air, the ground beneath him. Trade. Alex stumbled back, nearly slipping on wet soil. He didn't wait to see what the creature wanted. He bolted, running until his throat burned and his legs trembled. When he reached the highway, he didn't stop until he saw headlights from a passing truck. The next morning, he learned that a fisherman had gone missing the previous night. His body was found tangled in the reeds shortly after sunrise. Everyone said he drowned, but Alex couldn't shake the feeling that he had been offered as a replacement one. Life for another. Alex refused to go near the lake again, but the nightmare didn't end. on nights when the wind died and the world fell silent. He heard water dripping slow, heavy drops right outside his front porch, and then the footsteps would start. Wet, dragging steps, circling the house, sometimes stopping directly under his bedroom window, and always, just before the last step faded, that same whispered word seeped through the cracks of the house. Your turn. Story 8. The Guest in Room 19. Melissa hated the graveyard shift at Pinnacliff Lodge. The building was old. The hallways always seemed a little too dim, and more than once she'd heard guests whisper about strange noises coming from the unused rooms. But she needed the paycheck, and nights were usually quiet. That changed the evening. A tall, gaunt man arrived as the storm clouds rolled in. He wore a long coat that dripped with rainwater and kept his hat pulled low enough that Melissa never saw his eyes. His voice was thin, almost brittle when he spoke. Room 19, he rasped. Please. The way he said please made her skin crawl, but she handed him the key without asking questions. Thunder shook the building hours later. Just as the clock struck 2:14 a.m., the phone rang. Melissa picked it up, expecting a wake-up call. Instead, she heard breathing raspy, uneven, like someone gasping for air. Then a voice whispered, Room 19 isn't alone. Melissa slammed the phone down. A second later, another call came in, this time from the locked manager's office. No one else should have been inside the building, she answered, voice shaking. Hello? Don't go near 19, a distorted voice whispered. Then silence. Melissa checked the hallway monitors, heart thundering. On the screen for Room 19's corridor, shadows flickered under the door. Not the shadow of a person moving, but thin, shifting shapes that crawled along the bottom of the frame. The door creaked open slowly. The tall man stepped into the hallway, his movements stiff, like he was being pulled by strings. Behind him, something crawled out, pale hands. Dozens of them, dragging themselves across the carpet, as if they belonged to something trying to piece itself together. Melissa stared in horror, as the hands retreated back inside the room, and the man turned toward the camera. His mouth stretched unnaturally wide as he smiled directly into the lens. The lobby lights flickered wildly, and static washed over the screen. When the monitors cleared, he was gone, at sunrise. Melissa found the key to Room 19 on the counter and a note written in jagged letters. Thank you for the stay. Keep the room warm. It hungers between visits. Staff later sealed the room, but guests still complained of scratching sounds behind its walls. Some nights, when Melissa closed her eyes, she could almost hear the faint dragging of hands moving along the carpet, searching for their next visitor. Story 9. The Man in the Attic. Grace thought the new apartment was perfect, affordable, quiet, and close to work. The only odd thing was the attic hatch in the hallway ceiling. The landlord dismissed it quickly. It hasn't been opened in years, he said. Just storage up there. Nothing to worry about. But Grace noticed things right away. Each morning, the latch seemed shifted, just slightly off from the night before, as if someone had been nudging it from the inside. She tried to ignore it, chalking it up to an old building settling. But then came the noisy, slow, dragging footsteps directly above her bedroom long after midnight. One night, unable to sleep, Grace decided to record the hallway. She set her phone on a small table, pointing at the hatch, and went to bed with every light on. The next morning, she played the footage. At exactly 2:47 a.m., the hatch jiggled, then lifted just an inch, enough for a pale eye to stare directly into the camera lens. Grace dropped her phone and screamed. She called the police, who searched the attic but found nothing. Dust covered the entire floor. No footprints. No signs of life. That night, Grace tried to sleep, but at 3:10 a.m., she heard a whisper through the vents, a soft voice that slithered into the room. Why did you stop watching me? Grace froze. Something scraped above her, dragging slowly across the attic floor. Heart racing, she ran into the hallway, just in time to see the hatch swing open fully. A tall, gaunt figure hung upside down from the opening, head dangling inches from her face. His skin was stretched and thin, his eyes wide and hungry. He smiled, lips cracking. "I liked it better," he rasped, "when you didn't know I was here." Grace screamed and ran from the apartment barefoot, leaving everything behind. She never returned. When she later contacted the landlord to break her lease, he insisted no tenant lived in that unit. The apartment had been vacant for months, but Grace knew the truth. Someone had signed her lease. Someone whose handwriting matched the jagged words she found scrawled inside the attic. "Stay longer.